I think we're live. Hello, everyone. I'm welcome, and thanks so much for joining us for this webinar asking how we can make walking count in transport policy. I'm Emma Griffin, and I'm chairing the webinar today. I'm both a Fit trustee and I guess, a walking aficionado. I'm the co-founder of Footways, and also actually working with Tom Cohen. Actually, I'm going to do a quick plug now for our London Walking Festival conference on the 15th of May. Please sign up on the link in the thing. And we've got in the comments section, I think that's what you call it. And we've got three really interesting pieces of work and interesting people to hear from today. All the projects were supported by the Foundation for Integrated Transport. And looking at walking from different angles. We've got looking at how rural paths actually get delivered on the ground, how policy shapes behaviour and safety, and and the wider economic and social case for investing in walking. Before we get into that, I'm just going to give a quick introduction about the Foundation for Integrated Transport, which is essentially about backing people and organisations who are driving radical change of the transport system, creating a country where convenient, affordable, and integrated public transport is available to everyone as a basic right, and where people can live well without needing a car. And this was Simon Norton's vision, whose legacy funds the foundation. FIT provides grants and fellowships, social investments for work both at a community and national level. But to find out more, so we can get on quickly to the presentations, please sign up to the newsletter. Brogan's going to put links to that in the newsletter as well. Please sign up to the newsletter, follow us on LinkedIn, and also go and look at the excellent website integratedtransport.co.uk for lots more information, inspiration, and also all those links there as well. So today, I guess is really about one question. If the case for walking is so strong, why isn't change happening faster? We've got three fantastic contributors today. Laura Laker will be doing the main presentation, a journalist and author, looking at how to unlock delivery of rural walking and cycling paths. We've got Tom Cohen, reader in transport policy at University of Westminster and part of the Active Travel Academy, who's working on a project on the hierarchy of road users and how that plays out in practice. And we've got Tanya Braun, Director of External Affairs and Fundraising at the UK National Charity for Everyday Walking, Living Streets. And FIT provided funding for its third and latest pedestrian pound report, which makes the economic case rather brilliantly, I would say, for investing in better streets for walking and wheeling. Okay, so Laura's going to speak first for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to open up a wider discussion with Tom and Tanya. I'm going to bring in questions from the audience, I think, at the end of this discussion. But I will be looking at what's coming in on the feed, and now if something is very pressing and urgent, we can maybe bring that in as well at the same time as keep it a little bit like a webinar seminar. When it comes to the questions, I'm particularly keen for ideas. I guess we all understand the case for walking and better infrastructure and improved policy. The challenge is actually making this actually happen. So any ideas, inspirational thoughts or questions related to that would be much appreciated to get you going. So first up, we've got Laura, whose FIT funded project looks at how to unlock delivery of rural walking and cycling routes. It's very grounded in reality. It's a great read. I think we'll be putting the link to that in the chat as well. And looking at how things actually happen or don't happen, particularly for communities trying to make change locally. So over to you, Laura.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Emma, for that introduction. I am going to start my presentation. Okay. Yeah, so thanks everyone for being here, and thank you to FIT for funding this project. It's something I'm really excited about, and it's been just an amazing thing to be part of, full of inspiring stories. And yeah, so I'll get right into it. So this is about unlocking demand for rural walking and cycling routes, and a quick bit of background from me, which I think is relevant. So in 2024, I had a book published about the National Cycle Network. In it, I tried to make the case for a better delivery of cycling and walking routes. And you may or may not know that on the National Cycle Network's off-road sections, there are more people walking than cycling. I wanted to underline the value of decent networks, but also I had to highlight how difficult it is to deliver in the UK. And the more I looked into it, the more kind of amazed and frustrated I got, but also the more inspired I was by people like Richard Ackroyd, pictured there, pointing at a section of land which was going to be a path. And he and Froome's Missing Links have been fighting for, well, he's been at it for 12 years, but the gap between Frome and the end of the Colliers Way, 3 miles outside of Frome, has been a missing link for 20 years since the National Cycle Network was delivered. And the charity running the National Cycle Network, Sustrans, just couldn't afford the time or energy to deal with the landowners who didn't want the route to go into the town of Frome. And it's incredibly hilly around there, so nobody cycles. And this path that they want is a nice flat route that would follow an old railway line. So really important in parts of the countryside where there are few transport options to provide those alternatives. The good news is, although there have been these long and frustrating battles, some community groups have succeeded. And it occurred to me that wouldn't it be great to try and replicate some of that success? So the National Cycle Network, very quickly, you may or may not know, was built by volunteers, basically. It was started by the likes of John Grimshaw, pictured there on the bottom right, in I think 1979, lifting a gate, bike over a gate. And I think that section of NCN was opened last year or the year before, finally, after a 40-year battle. But it was very much a story of people power, and I partly wanted to call the book People Power, but it's it didn't end up being the title. But since the lottery money that funded the National Cycle Network ran out in around 2010, progress has very much stalled. It's reliant on amazing volunteers like the people in the top left on the Trans-Pennine Trail. Pictures like the bottom right, barriers put up, which mean that people who use wheelchairs can't get through. And there's random things like steps with a bollard on near Loch Lomond in Scotland, and bits that fall into the sea. And then there's amazing bits. You can see me pictured on the A27 path. So these paths are very much about the kind of tarmac routes that you could, wheel along as well as walking. It's not just for the kind of hardy hiker. So I wanted to kind of tap into this people power that delivered the National Cycle Network and continues to deliver little bits and bobs of paths around the country ever since. And so I had some amazing contacts from the book, and including these two women in the top middle who are basically in charge of the Trans-Pennine Trail. They work for Barnsley Council, and they're kind of powerhouses behind improving and maintaining that path. Top right, there is a 200-metre stretch of path in Curry Rival in Somerset, which community volunteers basically built, fundraised for, got the land access for, really remarkable stuff. And then bottom right is John Grimshaw a couple of years ago, one of the founders of the National Cycle Network. So in talking to lots of people around the country who've succeeded in building the path, people like the Curry Rival group, the Trans-Pennine Trail group, and Froome's Missing Links from the previous slide, there's kind of four main issues that I've come up with and I've put in my toolkit. And that's working with landowners, that's the big one, working with local authorities, working with local communities and building support, and working with the media. And it's designed to be used in sections. So it's quite a long document, about 85 pages, but it is designed to be sort of dipped in and out of, depending on where you're at. So in the absence of local authority funding and political will, local people are perfectly placed to drive this agenda on. So yeah, that's just a glimpse of, it's basically a Google document because it was, me producing it, and I'm not a designer. I've used word art and color and pictures and hyperlinks, but hopefully it's quite a navigable document. So as part of the project, I wanted to establish what was happening. As I said, landowner issues are the kind of biggest barrier in rural path construction and assembly. I freedom of information requests to all local authorities in England, and I found that 30% of them are failing to deliver traffic-free greenways because of landowner issues. And that was the question: how many paths are being held up? And often it was little bits of path, but it meant that a longer route couldn't be delivered because it would have meant that there was a gap in the middle. Local authorities don't have the funding, they don't have the expertise, and they don't have the time to fight these battles with landowners, and they won't use compulsory purchase powers for the large part. So while we would do this for roads as standard, compulsory purchase land because it's a strategic piece of infrastructure, we just don't do it for cycleways. There isn't the expertise, and there's not very many case studies. Just 2% of those have used compulsory purchase powers successfully. 1% are considering it, but most won't touch it with a barge pole. In addition to those, at least 300 miles, I crowdsourced community paths being held up, and I did a spreadsheet, which is linked to in the toolkit. 300 miles of path held up across 55 projects, and these are community groups who desperately want accessible paths in their area, but can't make the land ownership issues work. So good news stories are very much needed. So to landowners, bit of a scary topic, but as I say, some people have succeeded in working with landowners. So yeah, it's really, really essential. You can have everything else in place, but if a landowner won't agree and a local authority won't do compulsory purchase, that's kind of the end of the story. The good news is from the past campaigners that I have spoken to is that you can build this support. So one thing I found that works, people told me about, was if you approach via peers or use some sort of common ground, you approach very gently. John Grimshaw is bottom right there. I witnessed him that day talking to a landowner whose land they wanted to access for a path, and he just speaks kind of very gently. They always offer something in return, usually fencing, because landowners don't like dogs running into their land and potentially harming livestock. That's a big issue. Some groups have repointed walls for farmers, have tarmac driveways. It's all about just charming people into agreeing. And if all else fails, pictured top right, the chap in the red t-shirt, he lives just beside that viaduct, and there was a locked gate at the end, and there was a landowner who said, "You're never getting through on this old railway line because I use the path for my farming activities." And in the end, they managed to get agreement to use the land next to the railway, and they've now connected 2 country lanes with a traffic-free path. And he told me that there's now families with mobility scooters who can use it. There's a woman locally who uses a wheelchair who can access it. And this really was only for hardy hikers before. So an amazing story. And basically what they did was just build up to the landowner's boundary, and that can create peer pressure, or, you know, local people say, well, why can't we get through the other side? Be really powerful. And a number of people have told me they've done similar, so that's really powerful. Well, I haven't done my animations on this page, but the next one is local authorities, another big one. Top right there is Cycle Chippenham, so more of a kind of town group, but they've been really successful. Quite an unusual structure in the council in that they're kind of part of the council. They kind of add capacity to the council, and they've managed to get lots of funding. They reckon between £500,000 and £1 million worth of funding, including for this little stretch of path. They've done cycle parking, and they're very much a kind of, I guess, critical friend, but helpful. And some of you may remember there was some research recently about cycle campaigners, and I guess you could say the same for walking campaigners. If people are shouting online, no local authority is going to agree to help them. It's all about kind of working with council, showing yourself as a helpful presence, creating extra capacity. Quite often staff won't know about little cut-throughs or specific legislation, things like that. Another key thing that people said was knowing relevant policies. So when local cycling and walking infrastructure plans are being updated, when local plans are being updated, just making sure that a route is included on that. And that really helps chances of funding coming along later, and makes it much more difficult for developers, for example, building over that path or building next to it and not connecting to it. And also, by being that kind of grassroots support, you can create demand you can show councillors that you have the support of the local community. And bottom right is Linda Brinklow from Sheppey on the Isle of Sheppey in Kent. And she and the local group have cleared the path themselves and really created a groundswell of support. And they have the support of the council as a result, because the council can see that it's potentially a vote winner, that people want it, and that it's well supported. So then to communities. So it's important to remember that most people support traffic-free paths. You may get sort of loud voices saying that they don't. It's the urbanisation of the countryside. People may not want a path behind their land, but actually most people want to be able to access the countryside traffic-free and not having to walk on dangerous rural roads. So the communities that have succeeded with their paths have really built a broad constituency of local support and managed to avoid backlash. And that's been about those people there. That's a youth group on the Isle of Sheppey. They've brought in lots of different organisations to support this path that they're building on a former light railway. And they've brought in youth groups, they've brought in local businesses. That means that they are not seen as a niche interest group. They're all about the community. So it's building confidence among young people by helping them volunteer. It's giving businesses a chance to show that they're helping the community by loading equipment for free or sponsoring part of the path. And it helps, and landowners have kind of offered bits of land in the hope that it helps them get planning permission for developments. So Sheppey did that really well. And these case studies are all in the toolkit. And they talk about what's worked and what hasn't. And Frome has been really, really good at building community support. So they have a ceilidh every now and again that they use to fundraise for bits and bobs of equipment and path. They, when they built their last section of path, they had sponsored benches. So if you paid £1,000, you could have a name on a bench. And they did lots of work around the community using the skills that they gained from clearing paths and building things. So they would clear other paths around the area. They would kind of do paid work that they then put towards the path, and, you know, really, really creative stuff. And also it's important to remember that walking and cycling paths are real benefits to the community in terms of businesses. So driving walkers and cyclists to cafes. And a lot of these paths will have signs on them or have thriving businesses next to them that are kind of thriving because of that path, because of that traffic-free path. So it's about promoting the benefits and signposting local businesses to and from paths as well. So there's always the issue of the backlash, local backlash. And it seems that having a big idea, promoting that idea seems to gain support. And then if you're talking about a specific route, you kind of have to carefully discuss with local people about where exactly that would go. So yeah, it's a little bit of a difficult line to tread, but I discussed that in the toolkit and what works and what doesn't. And I found that leaflet campaigns can be a bit of a double-edged sword. They let people know about paths, but they also have in some cases inspired counter leaflets or online campaigns. And I think I talk about that in the next section. So working with the media, I've put as a really important thing, because I know from my work as a journalist and also from looking at paths around the country and being interested in this agenda generally, that a local path campaign or a local path construction can become a national story, and it can become a good news story or a bad news story. And often, you know, if a council's planning to build a path, for example, and a group of people don't want it, then they might go to the media and that becomes the story. Local people angry about paths. Nobody wants this. It's dangerous. You know, all of the kind of usual tropes about changing the streetscape or the landscape. So getting ahead of those stories and building a groundswell of support that you can then show to local reporters and even hand them as stories can really go a long way. So these two pictures are from Sussex Greenways, and they are struggling with local politics and a sort of perhaps a lack of interest, but they have really managed to build this groundswell of local support by not looking like by looking like regular people, basically. They had a posh jumble sale, and one of their number is a former journalist, so he writes good news stories and then sends them to the local newsletter, and then they publish that. And so it creates that groundswell of support and that perception among people that people support it rather than oppose it. And that sort of is a positive loop, positive feedback loop. So bringing in lots of people is really important. And they and other groups have gone onto social media, politely countering misinformation about paths and just making sure that they are, countering that negativity with the positive message and underlining how much the benefit is for everyone. So finally, I just wanted to underline how popular even the most rural of paths. Obviously, some of these are urban paths, but some are very rural. And the Shepton Mallet one, second to bottom, was pictured at the start of the presentation. It's just a 300-yard long path that took pedestrians and cyclists off of a narrow pavement on a main road bridge down to this lovely traffic-free flat path that leads between some housing, the council offices, the supermarkets on one side. And they had a counter in there, and it was in a town of something like 10,000 people. They had 100,000 users in their first year. So I think it's really important to underline how important these very short stretches of path can be. It's not all about the sort of big 140-mile C2C routes, although they're obviously popular, but these really are kind of local assets. And, walking journeys tend to be a lot shorter. And paths like this can enable people to, walk to the shops, to walk to school, to do leisure walks, to improve their health, to wheel, to use their wheelchairs, to scoot. And so I think, having that data is really, really important. I think that's largely me. Oh, yeah, this is the path. There it is. So just 300 meters. And that's the head of highways, historic railways estate in the middle in the black and white jacket. I think that was the first path they allowed under one of their bridges after filling them in with concrete. So that was a good news story too. So I've put a link up to the toolkit there, but we can put a link in the chat as well if there's a chat on YouTube, or share it afterwards. But that is me.
Thanks so much, Laura. It looks like some incredibly rich and useful and inspirational material in there.
Thank you.
And I haven't had a look through it myself. There's so much, and the case studies and the recordings, that it's really great, and I really recommend everyone to go and have a good look through that.
Thank you. Oh yeah, there's audio recordings that I forgot to say. So they're kind of like podcast interviews, and they're linked to in the I'll just leave this up so people, just in case people want to write down the tiny URL thing. But yeah, there's audio interviews, because I know that can be quite a nice way of just listening as you go along, as as you're out and about, you can just listen to them. If you can download the SoundCloud app, then you can listen on your phone. So, and I'll stop sharing.
Thanks very much. I was going to save questions to the end, but there are some coming in now, and maybe we'll go through. First of all, a shout out from Mark Strong, saying that he's worked with John for over 10 years and can confirm everything you're saying. So that's Jim Chisholm has said Greater Cambridge Partnership, even with CPO powers, now generally builds greenways within highway boundary. So the Chisholm Trail, now half built, only exists through the work of John. So, which is the another bit, and I think we'll come on to that later.
And named after Jim Chisholm as well, named after the eponymous Jim Chisholm, thanks to all of his efforts, long efforts in getting this path built. Yeah, highway stuff can be good, but I think it's important for it not to be directly against a main road. If you can build it the other side of a hedgerow, but no one wants to walk, if you're thinking about having children next to a highway, you obviously don't, that's not ideal, and it's not going to be pleasant, and it's not going to be that accessible if you're cycling or walking with young people. But yeah, if you have the highway boundary includes kind of beyond the hedgerow stuff like the A27 path between Lewes and the edge of Eastbourne, then that can be fantastic. But it's, yeah, I think if you can do it well, then fantastic. And obviously highways authorities and national highways have the powers to compulsory purchase, and they do it, you know, with regularity and without seemingly any of the problems that local authorities struggle against, and they own lots of land. But it sort of depends on the location, but certainly a good idea if you can do it right.
Yeah, thanks for that. And we're going to come on to some of these kind of the biggest systemic barriers later in the discussion. We're bringing Tom in, but there is one question for Mark which kind of leads into it. So I think we'll tackle this for Mark Strong. He says national road and rail networks are managed by government, also national trails such as the Pennine Bridleway and the New England Coastal Path, but the NCN is managed by a charity. Is this good?
Yeah, no, it's not good. It's not good. Yeah, it's I don't know, it's almost another discussion. I mean, the point of the toolkit was to say, well, this is where we are. And I talk about this in my book, that it shouldn't be the case that cycling and walking are singled out for poor treatment and patchy funding, and there's no kind of strategic planning to them. And I think that is changing, but whether it's going to actually happen on the ground, you know, it's changing in policy terms. But it was very much about working with what we have now. And I really think that building that groundswell of local support, because so often people say, oh, well, no one's walking here, nobody's cycling here, why should we build? But actually, if local people can get their voices together and can sort of can start to campaign for something locally, then it really does create that groundswell, and it becomes hard to ignore. And the Somerset Circle was a great example of different paths coming together or trying to link up different traffic-free paths to circle the entirety of Somerset. And the council had been ignoring this idea until it became so big that they could no longer ignore it. Everyone was so excited about this Somerset Circle and connecting all of these rural settlements together. And so I think, you know, just working with what we have, but very much, you know, it shouldn't be the case that it is like this. I agree.
Yeah, hopefully we can get into that a bit later. I think that's a really fascinating part of it, about when it all comes down to communities to do all this hard work and how far we can be pushing government to do more. Just another one from Jack Jardines, watching from London, Sweden. Hello, Jack from Sweden. It's so interesting to hear how you are approaching this in application, researching the integration of commuting between walking and cycling and trams here. Okay, well, I'll come on to that actually, this about the everyday walking in a question in a minute. But thanks for that, Jack. And another one, transport geekery. Whoever transport geekery is so many small market towns like Shepton Mallet that are the perfect geometry for walking. So these short missing links are quite significant overall. As Andrew Saffrey from Coventry, that is.
True.
Do you want to come back on that? He's got a follow-up here. So many small market towns like Shepton Mallet are the perfect geometry for walking. So these short missing links are quite significant overall. Sorry, that's a repeat. I think that was it. I don't know if there's anything you want to come back on that.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. And they're building lots of local campaigns with John Grimshaw are building lots of little missing links around there, and it's absolutely fantastic and really well used. And there's also a question about data and a lack of sort of data. And I know that this has been a query for National Highways, because they build lots of they're sort of one of the biggest cycleway builders in England, and therefore I guess one of the biggest walking route builders. And these are sort of major roads which bisect communities quite often. But they don't count, you know, how many people are using these paths. And if you're looking to reduce casualties, for example, on rural roads or paths, but you're not sort of counting who's using them, then you're sort of making it safer by driving people off of the roads, basically, who aren't in cars. So yeah, data is really, really important. And people say that we count what we care about. And with walking and cycling, the data is woefully inadequate, particularly for walking.
Yeah, that's really interesting. There's actually another question that's come in about that, about this lack of data for walking. Data is really important, says David Hunter. Yes, but there is virtually no strategic monitoring of everyday pedestrian movement in the UK, unlike every other mode of travel. And going back to Jim to Jack's comment as well about everyday walking. I wonder whether we could bring this out a little bit. Um, um, so this is obviously about rural and mostly leisure walking, but would be interesting to see how far this work kind of feeds into the everyday walking as well, and how far these paths are being used for that. I wonder if you could talk about the links of these paths and everyday utility trips as well, and
Yeah.
that is the
Uh,
data.
Yeah, I mean, the last picture in Shepton Mallet, the council offices are just off to one side. As I say, there's an industrial estate and new housing underneath the bridge in the distance, and it's very much an everyday walking path. There's children getting to school, there's people getting to work. It's, it is the epitome. It's kind of in the heart of the town, or I guess what would have been the edge of the town, but obviously the town's growing, and so this is very much an everyday link that has become a vital connection. And actually, the peer-to-peer way, which was on my table, they've managed to separate out cyclists, walkers, and horse riders. And they've got this quite clever radar counter thing, so they can sort of count and assess who's using it. So, but yeah, for sure, a lot of and the thing about these sort of leisure routes is if you start to connect them into towns, then you start to improve the in-town routes and yeah, and so they benefit local people as well for local journeys.
Great. That's great to hear. I know we've got David, Tanya here, and Tom also keenly looking from the kind of everyday walking research. We'll come back to that in a minute. Let's go back to that point about data again, about the lack of pedestrian data, which I'm sure everyone on this call knows so much about. And I've got another comment here from Z Saltschiller.
Zolt.
There you go. You know who this is.
Yeah.
Local economic impact reports can be really powerful. Devon did this back in something and showed just 3 of their multi-use trails generated approaching 14 million a year. So
Mm.
data, I don't know if we've got anything to say about that.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, data Europe-wide on traffic-free paths is very poor in terms of the economic impact. And these are really powerful. I mean, the Camel Trail in Cornwall is the second biggest tourism generator in the sort of most popular tourist attraction, I should say, in Cornwall, second only to the Eden Project. But it's quite often forgotten. And people really want these paths and they bring huge benefits. And there isn't really good data in the UK. And I went to visit England once for some data on the impact of cycle tourism specifically, and they had vastly underestimated it. But yeah, I think the data really needs improving because yeah, you there's lots of kind of I think the Lake District is among those places where lots of people obviously go to the same places and they're very much looking to try and draw people out of those honeypot areas because it gets overcrowded and you can spread the sort of love around. And Cycling UK did some great work with trails, piecing together bits of existing route to get people out of those usual overcrowded tourist destinations. But yeah, I think the impact on tourism is really substantial and shouldn't be underestimated. And in Europe, they've just included Eurovelo as part of the strategic tourism network. Yeah, just recognize cycling and walking as a strategic tourism, sustainable tourism benefits. So, which is good. Yeah.
That's great. One thing I was curious about, and I know this isn't just about walking, this is cycle routes, and I know a lot of your work in the past has been about cycle routes. But I was wondering, have you noticed any differences in how easy routes were to progress depending on how you framed them? For example, is walking more politically acceptable than cycling at the moment? If you picture it as a walking route, you're more likely to get it in. I'd be interested to see
Yeah.
your thoughts on that.
And I have noticed actually a couple of I guess because I'm interested in this, I sort of spot news stories where there's a new kind of bridge somewhere that's for walking and cycling. And it's funny because sometimes that it's billed as a walking bridge and you look into it and you look at the widths and you look on you go to a different website and it's a cycling and walking bridge, but it seems like it's being marketed as a walking bridge. And I do think it sidesteps some of the culture war stuff around cycling. And I think it's important. And why shouldn't it be a walking bridge anyway? Because I mean, probably, like for traffic-free infrastructure in towns and cities, most of the users are going to be walkers. So I don't think there's anything wrong with framing it that way. And it does seem like it's a strategy that some local authorities are using to try and sidestep some of this issue. And yeah, I mean, if it helps people support something more, and it's true, it's accurate, then why not?
Yeah, that's yeah. I wonder how things will change. Yeah, following the local elections as well coming up.
Mm.
But just going back to the utility and everyday, and Tanya might want to come in this, but I'll read a couple of quick comments, and maybe Tanya or Tel might want to come in on that leisure versus utility, whether it is a versus or not. Maybe it's not such a big divide. I don't know. So Jack Jardine says, I noticed that a way to reduce risk for commuters on foot is they integrate simple number signage on every street light along the path. So if anything goes wrong, you can provide the number on the post. Interesting. And then Schultz-Schiller, again, is that NTS data shows leisure is single most common purpose for a car journey in England. Also, positive leisure experience can be the first step to utility. I think that's, yeah.
Yeah.
We must not see them as complementing,
Yeah.
complementing, not separate.
NTS is National Travel Survey.
Mm.
Yeah, this is a bit of a bugbear of mine. I mean, we talk about commuting as if it's the be all and end all, but actually, most of our trips across all modes are for leisure. And it's really important. I mean, leisure means, if you're walking and cycling, you're getting out and getting fresh air, getting exercise, you're benefiting your mental and physical health. You're able to access, if you've got safe routes, then you're able to access services if you don't have a car. And they're really, really important. And there's no reason really why leisure should be any less important than commuter. And like Schultz says, if you're walking and cycling for leisure, then you're potentially more likely to do it for commuting, and they shouldn't be separate. We don't separate out roads. We don't, the North Wales, there's a road along the sort of top along the coast of North Wales, and it's like it's a leisure driving route for many, for many people, and it's no less important than a sort of motorway.
Yeah, I mean, Tanya, I'm sure you've got a lot to say on this as well as coming from the everyday utility walking side of things.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what's been said already, but I think that one of the key things about transport policy is it is built around, our system is built around how efficient vehicles are. And that's, I think, one of the key reasons why walking gets left out or gets pushed down in transport policy, because our whole system is looking at how can we get X person from A to B the quickest, and how can we move that all as quickly as possible. And it isn't taking into account people and how they live their lives and all of the other benefits that walking brings to health, to local economies, to community, to the local environment. And that's a lot of what prompted us to do the Pedestrian Pound report, to kind of show how walkable realm and getting more people walking, or encouraging them, supporting them to walk more, can actually holistically improve our lives for many aspects. And that latest edition of the Pedestrian Pound report, launched at the end of 2024, was the first one where we kind of brought in the monetary value of community benefits, health benefits, and sort of environmental benefits, as well as the local economic benefits to the sort of specific high streets and town centres. And I think it makes a really good case for, looking at walking more in transport policy to benefit all of those areas of our lives, because it shows, we saw that in Shrewsbury town centre, which is a market town, as someone has mentioned, there was 25% boost to sales because 3 of the high streets were closed to vehicles and open to people, pedestrianised. It can make quite a big difference. So I think that the utility and leisure walking, it's really important to look at it as a whole when it comes to sort of transport policy.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tanya. Is there anything you want to add to that, Tom? I'm sure you've got lots to say on this as well.
Well, I have a lot to say about most things, as you know, Emma, but I will try to contain myself. I was going to come back to something Tanya said, which I think is really interesting and quite important, and that is that our interpretation of efficiency has probably been largely conditioned by a motorized view of the world, because it takes an enormous amount of energy to propel someone 1 kilometer inside a car for reasons that we don't need to go into. And walking is considerably more energy efficient. So if we could cease to be quite so obsessed with time and thought if we thought more about energy, we might begin to look at our modes in a slightly more balanced way. But the more general point about avoiding a false dichotomy between leisure and utility walking is very well made. The links are clear. We clearly want people to be doing both. Maybe in transport policy terms, we focus more on utility walking because the fixation on mode shift and on dealing with congestion means that we think of walking as a way out of some of the problems that we've got ourselves into in our urban areas. And I suppose by implication, a leisure walk isn't automatically one which would have taken place by a motorized mode otherwise. It may be something which is truly additional, but all the benefit side of things is valid for both types. And I think I probably agree with Zsolt in saying that some forms of active travel probably start with leisure and move into utility. You start with a discretionary trip before you start making a non-discretionary trip by those modes.
And as Susanna Clement says in the comments as well, and yes, by saving time, by going fast, to do what exactly? What are we saving time to do? Why do we need, and why do we even need to travel so far? Yeah, thanks for that. I think, well, okay, I'm going to move on now, and maybe we'll hear a little bit from Tom and Tanya about the work that they've been doing. So Tom, you've been working on a project on the hierarchy of road users. I'll let you explain what the hierarchy. I'm sure everyone here knows it, but I'll let you give a short introduction. Tell us what it's trying to do and what it tells us about what actually needs to change.
Thanks. Well, I suppose I should start by expressing my gratitude to the Foundation for Integrated Transport because it's their grant which has enabled this work to happen. So that's a big plus for me, and I'm really pleased that FIT exists and is funding this kind of work. So they gave me this money and I'm spending it well. The hierarchy of road users, as I suspect most people on the call know, is something that was added to the Highway Code as of 2022, long campaigned for, much discussed. The idea being that it was meant to change our thinking concerning the responsibility of various types of road user with regard to the safety of everyone else on the network. And instead of what has been the prevailing presumption that we're all equally responsible to take care of ourselves and others, the hierarchy said, people who are in charge of vehicles that can do the most harm in the event of a collision have a greater responsibility to reduce the danger that they cause. And the thing about the hierarchy is that simple statement is intuitive. I think it's by the vast majority of the active travel community, it's accepted and embraced. The difficulty comes in, well, then what? What exactly should that imply in terms of how we conduct ourselves on the roads? What, if anything, should it imply in terms of our policies? So the project that we're doing, thanks to FIT, is called the Hierarchy of Road Users - Where Next? And it has involved a survey with 2,000 people, nationally representative sample, where we presented them with various questions about how road users ought to conduct themselves and what sorts of policies might be acceptable. And we're now taking the findings from that survey into a series of focus groups with subject experts. We've had one, we've got a couple coming up. And we'll see where that leads. I think it's a conversation which is really only going to start as a result of this work. And there's much more that could be said and done. But the grant from FIT has enabled us to make I think, a meaningful start on the conversation. In order to elicit some of the thornier questions in all of this, for example, the tension between the idea that one group might have greater responsibility than others, but what does that mean for the people who are at the other end, the hierarchy, which puts pedestrians at the top because they're the ones who face the greatest risk of injury in the event of a collision? What does the hierarchy say about how they should conduct themselves? And all of this in the context of a world which is, I don't need to tell anyone on the call, geared up to cater for motorized movement, and which doesn't prioritize, apart from in lip service, movement by active modes. So there's a context which is hostile to the changes which the hierarchy is trying to inculcate, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't all fight for it.
What are you fighting for? What do you think are going to be the? I mean, I was on an incredibly interesting focus group yesterday, Tom, looking at some of the solutions that can make this hierarchy land well, and it's really interesting. Be interesting to see what you're thinking about. Might be big changes that we could see that might make actually people realise that this exists, this hierarchy.
Sure. well, the research we've done covers a variety of things, including people's awareness of the hierarchy and then their sympathy with the messages inherent in it. We're also asking people, I suppose, about various things. What sorts of speed limits ought to prevail in different scenarios and relating to different vehicle types? What sorts of things we should be expecting of drivers in terms of the way they conduct themselves? Should they look twice before maneuvering in order to avoid knocking into someone cycling or riding a motorcycle? Should we have an expectation that people should only drive when there's no alternative? And as you can imagine, people's reactions to those propositions vary a lot. We also ask questions about sorts of policy measures which we might consider. The more contentious stuff would be, for example, higher parking charges for SUVs as compared with standard cars. Slightly less contentious stuff would be lowering the drink drive limit. And so testing general members of the public's attitude to these things will help us to understand, I hope, the room for maneuver.
Yeah.
As in, and how much of this stuff is feasible and how much is the term pitch rolling? How much pitch rolling would be necessary in order to prepare a population that is largely unready for this to accept these things? And this is all alongside the many other arguments for promoting active travel and for trying to encourage mode shift, which again, I don't need to repeat in this forum, but trying to understand whether road danger reduction is one of the most potent levers, as I suspect it might be, and then how you use that lever, given that there are still lots of things standing in opposition to that kind of movement.
Yeah, great.
As you've gathered, I could talk about this forever.
Great, and I just wanted to link to Lisa Hopkinson's also asked a similar question, and I guess maybe we could ask some of the other panelists, Laura and Tanya, what would you recommend in terms of policy to put this transport hierarchy into practice? I don't know, Tanya, if you've got anything you want to add to that.
I mean, we saw in the integrated national transport strategy that's been rebranded to Better Connected Transport Strategy that the government is looking at rolling out side road zebras. So that, for example, would support the side road junctions giving pedestrian priority. If we had those on most side roads, then it makes it very clear that the priority is the pedestrian. And I think another kind of big one, we did a report with the Bikeability Trust last year on recommendations for the government's road safety strategy. I think, making it clear that those who are in the most powerful vehicles are the most liable if there are incidents is really quite an important one as well.
Anything you want to add, Laura, to this? Okay, well,
I was going to say side road zebras as well, but yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know if we've got time, but I know, Tom, you're also working on researching the level of service standard for transportation, which is still focused on vehicles. Maybe really quickly, we haven't got a huge amount of time, but I know you could speak for this for a long time because I have heard you talk about it for a long time and it is very interesting. But what would feel different for pedestrians if we genuinely designed about them and gave them the same level of service that all the cars are getting? If you can do that in one line, I'll be amazed. But anyway.
Oh, in one line.
No, you can have more than a line. You can have more than a line. It's all right.
Okay, well, I see a comment from David Hunter, I think sums it up well, which is that the way things are geared at the moment, we're prioritizing movement by motorized vehicle. And that means that level of service, which is just one way of looking at these things, is equally geared towards motorized transport. So in very simple terms, if the world were fairer, then conditions for making a trip by walking or wheeling would be just massively better than they are. How's that?
Yeah. I think we all know actually what that actually really does look like, doesn't it? We really can see what a city designed and real places designed for walking looks like with making it happen. Okay, I'm going to move on to Tanya. I know you've mentioned a little bit about the third edition of the Pedestrian Pound Report, which I recommend everyone go and read. I'm sure we can put a link to that somehow in the chat as well. And which makes the case, as you said, economically, but also in terms of health, in terms of place, in terms of community. It's a really clear argument. So what's the gap? Why isn't that evidence landing in policy decisions? And if it did land, what would councils be doing differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we wanted to do through the Pedestrian Pound document, was to make that case for local authorities to put more walkable round throughout throughout their areas. And I mean, we have seen a bit of a success with Oxford Street, because we've been told by Will Norman that the pedestrian pound 3 was used as part of a portfolio that meant that Sadiq Khan, finally pushed the Oxford Street pedestrianisation through. So we're hugely pleased about that. And I think that this latest edition, the 3rd edition, really did make that case about the holistic monetary benefits to producing the walkable realm. It isn't just about there being more spending on the high street and local streets, which we know is really important to government. They want to boost the economy. They want to boost local economy. They want to provide, nice places for people to go and spend their time and their money. But we also felt that it was really important to show that walkable realm has that boost to health. So we found that in Scotland, the number of deaths averted by walking to work in 1 year was worth over £600 million. And I think it's been really widely reported in the media how much money the 20-mile-per-hour speed limits coming into effect in Wales created. That was over £92 million worth of health benefits or money saved to the Welsh NHS just in that first year that it was implemented. So I think these kind of, data was mentioned at the start in the comments. Data is so important for us to tell the story of why walking and walkable realm is so important. I'm sure we'll get on to what more people can do and how more people can help. But data and, those personal stories are so vital. I think, money makes the world go round, and it hasn't been clear maybe that walking can support that theory. There's not luxury flashy models like we get with motor vehicles that people can buy into and sort of show off, and they're not status symbols. Most of us can walk out of the door and literally walk out of the door with no specialist equipment. So I think that's one of the things that we wanted to work on with the pedestrian pound report and pedestrian pound 3, was showing that yes, it might not be a sellable product as such, but it can help boost the economy and help raise money. And in the latest edition, we also used a lot of case studies. I think another thing about walking and making walking more important for transport policy or people just in government in general is what actual changes need to be made and how that actually translates. I think many of us can envisage a cycle lane or a flashy new piece of motorway. But when it comes to what's going to make a walking route better for people, well, yeah, maybe we can think about clear, well-maintained pavements, but there are also things like community art or rain gardens or more crossings, side road zebras. And I think those case studies in the pedestrian pound report, the last edition, really helped to show how walkable realm had encouraged more people to sort of spend time at the weekend market and take pride in their local areas and enjoy living and supporting that kind of walkable realm where they lived.
Yeah, thanks.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just some really interesting comments coming in here as well, which I'm sure you can all read about this, about how these kind of trade-offs between walking and other forms of transport plays out in practice, which is really useful. Thanks for that. And I know, Tanya, we've got kind of a big move on pavement parking this year, and which is great news for English councils. It's definitely a step forward. I know this is following a very, very long campaign from Living Streets. I guess my first question is, do you think it goes far? Do you think the powers for English councils go far enough? And even with a ban, even if there was a UK ban, it doesn't really solve everything. I mean, the pavement's becoming increasingly contested spaces. And now talk of robots delivering things, again, it sort of seems to be another step way too far. So I guess, what other policy changes do you want to see to make sure that pavements really are for people?
Yeah, and that's the crux of it. We want pavements to be kept just for people. And I think with pavement parking, it's a huge relief to have a response after 5 years from the government, and a response that aims to tackle the issue. We would have liked a nationwide ban. I think the main reason behind that is the consistency of message. I think one of the problems with the whole pavement parking thing, because it's actually currently illegal to drive up onto a pavement. So it's all very confusing for people as to what's allowed, what's not allowed. Was just having a really coherent moment of this is going to be prohibited across the country. But I think in reality, you know, having a two-prong approach, which is what we will have, or we are having, in some secondary legislation allowing local authorities to fine people obstructing the pavement, so parking incredibly badly, that needs to be defined, and statutory guidance will need to be issued on what that actually means. But them having those powers, but hopefully also having powers to actually ban it, prohibit it in their area through primary legislation, I think it will be really powerful. The issue will be postcode lottery. It will be encouraging all of the leaders, all of the people who are going to be in charge of whether pavement parking is banned in their areas, making sure that they do it, which Living Streets will be fighting for. It was a 50-year campaign of ours, so we're not giving up yet. But I think that, yeah, we're really keen that kind of local campaigners get behind this now, because to be honest, whatever way the government had gone, local enforcement would have been an issue in some areas. And so we really need to put the pressure on local authorities to bring in the ban, but then enforce it, so that people aren't being, you know, their lives aren't being blighted by cars parked on pavements and having to walk or wheel into the road. And, you know, we hear from a lot of people about how that literally puts them off leaving the house. When it comes to other elements of the pavement, you know, I think it's so important that pavements are well maintained, and this has always been a bit of a struggle of ours. We did a report on slips, trips and falls, and the fact that it's costing the UK economy £500 million a year. It also puts people off leaving the house, especially if they're older and more unstable on their feet. You know, we hear from many people who just won't go walking, or will only walk in certain areas, or only walk at certain times of the day. That's unacceptable. So we need to have well-maintained pavements. We need to have clear pots and clear guidance for authorities, not just to be spending money on dealing with potholes in the road, but spending money on dealing with potholes on the pavement. But yeah, delivery robots, quite a concern of ours at the moment. Pavements need to be for people and not for, you know, other vehicles getting in the way of disabled people, parents with buggies, older people who are less stable on their feet. So we want to see pavements kind of given that priority, you know, and just kept clear of everything else, that they're there for people.
Thanks, Tanya. That's great. And now I'm going to come on to the big systemic stuff. And I know, you know, and I can see comments that come from Fredonia 837, and it said, I think this was the next big question is like, and we can see across all your work, there's clear evidence, there's clear recommendations, there's clear demand for change. So I guess what the big thing that's holding progress back in the areas that you're looking at, the biggest systemic barrier? What major change would you like to see at a national policy level to change things? So maybe start with you, Laura. It struck me in your presentation, it was like communities are doing a lot of this work. I mean, it really is coming down to them. Without that, it doesn't seem like many of these parts would happen. I mean, could we be pushing for CPOs? Is that a realistic demand for local authorities? What's the big change national policy level that you're desperate to see?
I think there needs to be some support for local authorities in terms of this project specifically. I mean, CPO is quite I don't know, it's quite an aggressive kind of move. Another one that is perhaps a little bit more palatable to local authorities and perhaps to landowners is path creation orders, and it's maybe a bit policy wonky, but it just means that a path is built and the landowner retains ownership, but the path is built and it can be used by sort of the public. But I mean, late last year, I was behind an open letter regarding the cycling walk investment strategy in England, CWIS 3, because the draft was very, very weak, and it talked about having long-term realistic and measurable milestones and targets, you know, not just kind of outcomes. i.e. people should feel safe cycling. I mean, which is quite vague, but actually we've got local cycling and walking infrastructure plans, which is where local authorities have designed networks, and then, you know, how about kind of funding and supporting local authorities to deliver those? I think so many things, we see this in new developments as sort of designed from the perspective of drivers, with those pavement parking bays that mean that you know, they're kind of, people end up sort of straying into the pedestrian realm, and you know, how about thinking about it as a kind of mode of transport, having targets, and and I don't know, just kind of having targets and meeting them really, and thinking strategically about networks and how they're delivered at a local, regional and local level.
I just do a shout out. Footways, we're working with Living Streets on a pilot project for Active Travel England that's been looking specifically at the local, the LC whips, and where they're falling short in walking completely, really. And with the cycling seems to be working quite well, but the network planning for walking has been less than good. And so we've been looking at recommendations for that. So keep an eye out for that. Shall I go on to you, Tom, next? What big change do you want to see? And then I'm going to have to get through all these questions in 15 minutes, but I think we can do it.
I have every confidence in you, Emma. I entirely understand Mike's asking the question, and I think it's a surprisingly hard one to answer, because there certainly isn't a golden bullet as far as I know. As far as my preferences go, I'm strongly inclined towards car restraint on a very big scale. And any answer that I might give to the question has to be preceded by well, what's the context? Do we live in our current highly motorized society where policymakers are sometimes unwittingly very much in the pocket of the motor industry? Or can we imagine a world in which things are altogether different? Maybe we don't need to get into that now, but that would determine the extent to which car restraint could be applied. National road user pricing seems to me to be an obvious and desirable thing. If done well, it's a revenue generator which would help to fund the sorts of things that we really need in order to make other ways of traveling more attractive and more feasible. And obviously, it has the twin and very welcome consequence of making driving less appealing. And that's really where we need to aim. Sorry, a bland answer, but I think that's probably the honest position for me.
Fully yeah, much backed by me as well. Tanya, anything else that I know we've got the national pavement parking ban, and that is it's still on the list, really. But anything else that you could add? Big changes, golden bullets, is that what you call it?
I mean, I do really agree with Tom, but I think to go alongside that, and you know, I've already mentioned it, the fact that we are assessing all of our streets based on vehicles going at the fastest possible speed, I think that whole assessment needs to change. You know, we need to give planners the ability to not just plan these kind of wide major roads, and we need to have a vision for this country or for local areas that are, you know, the widest part of the street is for people walking and cycling and wheeling, and then it's public transport, and then it's, you know, a small lane for cars if need be.
Right. And I'm going to read out some of the comments that are coming in. I'm not sure you can all see them, but let's start. So outside big cities, most highways authorities choose to ignore the pedestrian-friendly manual for streets, sticking with the 1940s concept with distributor roads, roundabouts and estates, and of a walking development which guarantees no walking, no cycling, and dreadful conditions for public transport. Change that, and the shock would ricochet through the HAs. Is that housing?
Highway authorities.
Sorry, yeah. Anyone want to come back on that?
Well, it does prompt a thought, because the thing that most struck me in Better Connected, the document which Tanya mentioned earlier, is perhaps a slightly niche item on revising the guidance on the network management duty, which everyone on the call know comes out of the 2004 road. Oh, I'm going to have to remind myself. Yeah, the Traffic Management Act 2004. This is interesting because, again, if you followed it, you will know that there was relatively generic guidance produced then about managing traffic and allowing its expeditious movement. But to its credit, it did acknowledge even back in 2004, that traffic meant all modes, including pedestrians and people cycling. And fast forward to 2022, I think it was, or 2023, and I think it must have been the Johnson government, still by the skin of its teeth, that brought out additional guidance, which was intended to make active travel better served through the network management duty. By 2024, of course, that all had to be swept aside because we had the plan for drivers, and anything that made active travel appealing was going to be inimical to people driving. So it got washed away. So we have this interesting situation now where Better Connected may be about redressing the balance, at the very least taking us back to the guidance that was intended to facilitate movement by non-motorized modes according to this act, because this act has real power if it's applied to the letter, i.e. treating all forms of movement as valid forms of traffic, and not, as has tended to be the case, thinking that it's all about the expeditious movement of motorized vehicles. So I have high hopes, and I really hope that I will not be disappointed that when this comes through, the change flows with it.
Great, thanks for that, Tom. And there's another comment here from Louise Morales, and I've been working with developers to put walking and cycling routes in all new development, and with upcoming grey belt building applications, asking Surrey County Council to insist on active travel connections. And I think this is a really important point about, building in walking networks, so when new housing developments come in, they do actually connect to town centres and to other developments. And I know Lisa's been working on a radical paper on pedestrian priority. It's been looking at this as well, so keep an eye out for that. So anyone wants to talk about this on the sort of network planning for walking and how that fits in with housing development and actually getting that to stick, because they local planners talk about pedestrian priority, but when they actually come to building these things, it doesn't actually happen. So what, any ideas on that? Laura, you've got your hand up. You're coming in.
Me?
Yeah.
So one of the great things that some of these rural path campaigners are doing is looking at housing developments, noticing where they have and haven't been holding up kind of local plan policies, and sort of trying to make sure that they do. And it's quite common for a housing estate to be built next to a piece of national cycle network, but there's no connection between them. And so local groups can be really powerful in making sure that there is provision, that Section 106, which is the developer contribution to local infrastructure, is used, or there's another one which is relating to connections around like crossings in and out of the network. And so they can be really helpful in pointing out stuff that local authorities might have been too busy or they don't have the knowledge of, and just making sure that happens, and that has been really powerful in some cases. So
that's interesting. Could you put a local walking network and make that a legal requirement in a local plan? Do any of you have more of a technical knowledge on that and how that would work, whether that's a realistic thing to do? So then you had to attach to a network if it actually was planned and there, then you had to connect to it. Would that work?
Yeah, if it's in the LC WIP, if a route that a local group wants is in the LC WIP, the local cycling walking infrastructure plan, then the housing developer, as I understand it, has to consider putting a route in. They don't necessarily have to build it, but it does protect it. And if it's in the kind of that's part of the local plan, and if it's kind of in the local plan, then it does become harder for developers to ignore it, and it does give it kind of strength, and it makes it easier to get funding for.
One thing we've been looking at is actually maybe we do need to make much more clearer hierarchies of walking routes, and if they are really embedded in local plans, then will be taken more notice of. Mark Strong actually has a comment which is linked to this, because I know that this group did create a hierarchy, but I have no idea how many local authorities actually look at it. So there was an almost unknown group, says Mark, called the Footways and Cycleways Management Group, which advises on maintenance and reports to UK Road Leaders Group, managed by CIHT. Have any of you heard of this group?
Only because Mark told me about it.
No, they do have a hierarchy of walking routes, but I would love to know how many local authorities are looking at that. And a link to that, the LC WIP will only communicate with local county councils, not borough councillors, and many didn't attend, but I now invited all borough councillors, and we have loads more walking. So this is again about knowledge and understanding about what these walking networks look like, and getting everyone to actually realise that they are and exist. Is there anything we can say on that? And I've got a couple more minutes, I think. Tom, you're in.
I was going to return to the topic of new developments, and some will know that I'm involved in long-standing organisation, not quite the right word, cycling at tea time. We also have walking at tea time. Cycling at tea time did a couple of field trips, 3 field trips in 2025, in fact, and the first of these was to Waterbeach outside Cambridge. And it was really inspiring because it was, as you might expect or hope, new housing to be, as in prioritising active travel, definitely catering for car, but car was a secondary form of transport in this development. And the story behind it, I think, is interesting too, because it's about the interaction of 2 organizations, well, probably more than 2, in fact, but the housing developer, which is definitely on the Enlighten side, and the various parts of government in Cambridge being complicated, we don't need to go there. But those 2 managed to work in combination to achieve the kind of thing which is very rarely seen in our country. And I suppose it's noteworthy that we went there to have a look, because clearly it isn't the norm. What we need to try to do is a little bit like Laura has done in the case of Rural Paths, right? Identify the good stuff that happened there and see if it can be replicated. Right? Can those lessons be transferred to other settings? I'm sure they can be. It's not easy, but that's what we should be aiming at.
Thanks so much. We're nearing the end of the time. I don't know if there's any, I mean, there are a lot of ideas here. And it's so clear, the evidence is there, the demand is there, ideas are there, making it happen. I suggest this conversation has to continue, and it will. And I would recommend everyone going to follow Fit's LinkedIn page, carry on the conversation there. Is there any other points any of the speakers want to make before we close off? Anything that's not been said, and then I will do my best to wind it up. No. So go to the LinkedIn page, add some more ideas in there, specifically about things that could change. Keep an eye out for Transport for Quality's Life's upcoming paper on pedestrian priority. I think there should be I know there's some really incredible material in that. Check out Laura's toolkit. That's all got the links in there. Follow. Come to more Fit webinars, which seem to be very lively. And thanks for all the amazing discussion in the chat. And most of all, thanks to the speakers. Tom, before you come in.
Final plug for the London Walking Festival conference on the 15th of May. Link in the chat, hopefully. It's
going to be a cracker. We've got some great speakers. Ian Sinclair is our keynote, and we've got some really amazing range of speakers from lots of different backgrounds. So come to that, please. Yeah, and thanks to all the speakers and to Fit and to Simon Norton's Legacy for funding all these amazing projects. Thanks very much for joining, everybody.